Welcome to the I Fired My Boss franchise podcast. My name's Dan Claps, founder and CEO of Franchise Playbook, a franchisor platform where we create, own, and operate dynamic franchise brands in the mobile services space. And my life's goal is to help people just like you fire their boss and become a business owner.
And I'm Christian Dadulak, top franchise consultant and co-founder of Real Franchising, a leading franchise consulting firm. And together, we're on a mission to help people fire their boss, hire themselves, and live the American dream through franchise ownership.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the I Fired My Boss podcast with Christian Dadulak and Dan Claps. Very excited for this episode as we have Tracy Stapp Herold from Entrepreneur, going to be talking about the well-known Entrepreneur 500 and just really franchising in general and how Entrepreneur contributes to this fantastic industry. But before we kick into there, Christian, how have you been? I know we talk every day, it seems, but checking in.
Doing fantastic as always. Keeping busy over here at Franchise Sidekick. Loving every minute of what I do on a daily basis. And I know you're busy over there with Franchise Playbook and Devoda, but super pumped for Tracy today and to hear from our guest, because I think she has a lot of amazing things to share. I think Entrepreneur is an amazing resource, not just for franchising, but just for business ownership in general and just staying plugged in. And excited to hear how people that are in our audience that are maybe thinking about buying a franchise can use the Entrepreneur 500 list as a tool to help them with their franchise search, in addition to using a franchise consultant, broker, advisor, or online research and those types of things. So Tracy, thank you so much for coming on the show. We're super lucky to have you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I got to tell you, you have an incredible microphone. It sounds like
Oh, good.
Yeah. Well, we usually, if you've listened to our show, we always like to start off with just, instead of us giving the background, we'd love to know, no one really goes to school thinking I'm going to get into franchising. So how did you get into franchising and into Entrepreneur?
That's a great question. Well, I have been with Entrepreneur. I was a full-time employee for 20 years now. I actually interned there when I was in college, going to UC Irvine. So the Entrepreneur office was in Irvine at the time, and so it was right around the corner. I, wanted to have some sort of career in publishing or something that involved writing. And so I did a couple of internships with them. And then once I graduated, I was looking for work. So I worked across the cubicle from the franchise department. Basically, they were on the other side of my cubicle. And so I would hear them working. And to be honest, at the time, as a college student, I thought that sounds like a terrible job, and I would never want to work in the franchise department here. Of course, as a new graduate, desperately looking for work, and an opening came up at Entrepreneur, and because they knew me and I was an intern, they reached out to me, and it was in the franchise department. So now I have been in the franchise department for 20 years and definitely, over the years have grown into it and, come to be kind of the resident expert in franchising. And I promise I don't hate
it. That's awesome. I didn't realize an Entrepreneur's HQ, or at least I don't know if today, but back in the day was in Irvine. I'm a California Californian myself. I'm in Scottsdale now. I just moved here to Scottsdale like a couple of weeks ago, but I'm from Santa Clarita, up where Six Flags Magic Mountain is. So not super, super far from Irvine. So interesting. But
yeah, I think our office is in
glad to hear
Santa Ana now, but still Southern California based.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. Well, glad to hear that. Like most of us, franchising kind of fell in your lap, and probably wasn't the first thing you thought it was. But when you got into the franchise side of things, I mean, what was it about franchising that caused you to go from, I'm not sure, that sounds kind of boring, that sounds kind of like maybe something I wouldn't want to do, to I love franchising or wherever you're at, but at least I don't hate it. And you've been doing it and been on the franchise side of things
Yeah.
for quite some time now. So what was the shift there?
I don't know. It's not like there was a sudden moment where it happened, but I think
Sure.
if you're just, working with the industry long enough, it becomes your industry. It becomes something that you are passionate about and interested in.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the people
Yeah.
for sure.
And we have been working with a lot of the same people over the years, and sometimes they will switch from brand to brand, and we'll see their face and their name pop up again. So it's always interesting to get to know the personalities that are in the industry as well.
And so tell us a little bit more about what your role looks like now at Entrepreneur. What do you do exactly on a day-to-day
Yeah.
basis? And yeah, what do you do? What's
So
your
my
role?
title is Special Projects Editor, but essentially I am the franchise editor. I mainly work on the Franchise 500 and all of the other franchise rankings and lists that we put together throughout the year. So in addition to the Franchise 500, which is our big ranking that we put out every January, and we just had our 45th annual Franchise 500 come out a couple weeks ago. We also put rankings in every issue of the magazine. So usually there are at least 1 to 2 rankings in every issue of the magazine that we put out. So I am essentially in charge of wrangling that data, making sure that the rankings all make sense, putting them together, making sure that they look nice in the magazine, along with obviously a lot of help. But that is essentially what I do: is the franchise rankings and lists.
So just to kind of give our audience an understanding, what is the Franchise 500 ranking and how does it get ranked? Like how does the ranking work?
Sure. So we like to call it the oldest, or what do we call it? The oldest, most comprehensive franchise ranking in the world. We've been doing it since 1980. And, the way that we do it has evolved over the years, but we have developed a proprietary formula. But to go back, the process essentially starts every June, usually. We will reach out to franchisors and invite them to participate in the Franchise 500. So it's all voluntary. If you don't see a brand on the Franchise 500, it is probably because they chose not to participate. We get people asking all the time, why isn't such and such brand on the list? What did they do wrong? And it's just, they didn't want to be a part of it. But we do get, this year we got 1,389 applications. So 1,389 different brands that participated, which is, as far as I know, a record number. But it increases every year that we do it. And so we are getting a pretty good chunk of the industry represented in the list. So we invite those franchisors to participate. We have a very extensive online application that they have to fill out. And then we also require them to provide us with their franchise disclosure document, a list of units to verify the numbers that they're reporting to us, and some other documentation just to help us check their information and make sure that everything that they're telling us is correct. And then basically our team goes through every single application with a fine-tooth comb, comparing it to their FDD, comparing it to that list of units that they supply us with, and seeing if anything doesn't match up or if anything is questionable or doesn't make sense. And we will go back and forth with the franchisors to try to make sure that the data that we're ranking them on and the data that we're presenting to our audience is as accurate as possible. And then once we are comfortable with all of the data for all 1,300 plus brands, we run it through our proprietary ranking formula. And the major we look at more than 150 data points. So A, it's proprietary, and B, it's a lot of data. So we're not going to get into the nitty gritty on that, but the major overview of what we look at is we look at costs and fees, size and growth, how they support their franchisees, the strength of the brand, and then the financial strength and stability of the company. So we look at all of those factors, and then our formula gives us the ranking based on that data, and that is the Franchise 500.
and this is not just food, obviously, this is every sort of industry out there, anyone that applies. And so the franchise, theoretically, a home services franchise is getting ranked against a fast casual food concept and everything else. So it has nothing to do with industry necessarily, but more it's about those different data points, like you mentioned, within those general realm of
Right.
things.
And, there are everyone receives a score in those 5 areas that I named, but it's not as if a home service company is going to be compared to a giant food franchise in quite the same way. So we try to look at apples and apples, oranges and oranges. There are certain data points that we have multiple different ways of looking at them to make sure that we are comparing franchises fairly based on, what their costs are, what industry they're in, what size they are, and that sort of thing, so that even, smaller franchises or franchises in different industries have a chance to be ranked.
Just for our listeners that are Voda franchise owners or candidates, we launched in April and brought on our first franchise owner in June. So not on the list this year, but next year we will be. So it's interesting. I always find that a lot of times when it comes to surveys and different methods of making rankings, people don't always realize that sometimes, like you said, the brand's not in there doesn't mean they didn't they didn't do the
Mm-hmm.
forms or whatever else. But I've always enjoyed over my 10 years in franchising looking at the franchise 500 rankings and seeing that kind of the growth and where growth is happening. Franchising, there's so many different things to evaluate when you're looking at a franchise brand. And one of them is the speed at which it's
Mm-hmm.
growing, right? In my opinion, if I was buying a franchise and I saw that they were awarding territory at a not too fast, but at a sustainable rate, it's validation that a lot of people have gone through that process already and felt like they were ready to pull the trigger. And it's great that you're also ranking based on financial capabilities and leadership and everything else. So like what would be the number one brand? Like what would make someone the number one brand? Is it a combination? Like what would be kind of the poster child of best brand?
Well, to be number one, you really have to score high in all 5 of those areas that I mentioned. So, your cost and fees have to be good. Your size and growth has to be good. Your the way you're supporting your franchisees has to be not just good, but great. I mean, the top of the list is extremely competitive. Your brand strength has to be great. Your financial strength has to be great. I can tell you what our number one is this year. It's Taco Bell. And this is their 4th year in a row being number one on the list. So obviously they are hitting it out of the park in all of those areas over and over again. But as I said, the top of the list is extremely competitive. So to rank anywhere in the top, you really have to score well in every area, not just, okay, we're growing great, but our financials are a little weak, or vice versa, or anything like that.
Makes sense. I mean, so even just getting on the Entrepreneur 500 is tough because you said I think there's over 1,600
Right. Well,
applicants,
over
or if I'm
1,300, yeah.
maybe 1,300. Okay, sorry, yeah, 1,300. That's still, yeah, it's still tough to even just get on the list, and then even within the people on the list, I mean, obviously you want to be closer to the number one spot and further away from the 500 spot, so that's interesting, of course. Um, One thing that I'm curious about that you said originally was, some people just choose not to um, participate. And I'm curious, what are some of those reasons? Are they just lazy? They don't want to fill out the paperwork, or is it because I would think that being listed on the Entrepreneur 500 is kind of prestigious.
Yeah,
No?
I think a lot of brands, it's bragging rights for them. They are passionate about it, and we definitely see that when the results come out, because if they're not ranked where they want to be, we definitely hear from them. But there are brands, there are big brands that have not ever participated with us, or have not participated with us in many years. I mean, I'll name probably the most obvious one is Chick-fil-A. And as you guys probably know, they say getting into Chick-fil-A as a franchisee is harder than getting into, like, I don't know if it's Yale or Harvard, one of those Ivy League schools.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
Chick-fil-A really doesn't need any extra any extra publicity to say, we're a great franchise. Everybody already believes that. Now, we have a lot of great large brands on our list. I'm not saying that, all the big brands think it's not worth their time to be on our list. Obviously, we've got, Taco Bell, McDonald's, Subway, KFC, a lot of those big guys. And we're getting more of the bigger brands year by year. In the last couple of years, we've gotten Burger King and Wendy's to participate, for instance. So we're getting more and more of those big brands to recognize the value of participating. But it is also smaller brands do not always necessarily, or newer brands don't always necessarily realize the value of being a part of the Franchise 500. And I think a lot of times it is the thinking that, well, we're not going to rank in the top 500, so it's not worth our time to be a part of it. But we've really tried to get over that hurdle of getting people to realize that even if you're not going to rank in the Franchise 500, it absolutely is worth your time to fill out that form, which is kind of intimidating, especially if it's your first time doing it. But you'll get your free franchise listing in entrepreneur.com. You'll get a free listing in that January issue. Everyone who applies, whether they're ranked or not, is listed in the Franchise 500 issue. And then your Franchise 500 application is also your application for every other list and ranking that we do for the next year. So we have a top new and emerging franchises list. We have top home-based and mobile franchises list. We have top franchises for veterans. We have all these other lists that you can be a part of potentially if you submit your Franchise 500 application.
I think sometimes it's just awareness too, right? Like I know for me, like in June, if I don't get an email that says do this entrepreneur, I'm not going to think about it. And so some probably aren't also in the lists or see it
Right.
online or anything else. I also think it's interesting. Like you have to take the ranking too with a grain of salt in the sense that just some industries are just substantially more consumer facing. I was thinking about in my space, I'm in the restoration space. ServPro has 2,000 locations. It's pretty well known, but it's not that well known, right? We all probably every American knows about Taco Bell, it is a bigger brand, but that's because it also faces such a larger
Mm-hmm.
addressable market. So like I think that's interesting. Do you guys do breakouts between food and fitness and home services, or is it all just one blanket?
Yeah, so well, I mean, ServPro, by the way, I think they were number 11 this year, so they do great. um,
Oh,
so we do, like you're saying, the brand strength as far as consumer facing is not going to be the same for a Taco Bell versus a ServPro, and that's again one of the
it,
factors where we are not comparing the food brands to the restoration brands. We're comparing what's your brand strength within the restoration category? What's
mhm,
your brand strength within the
mhm.
food category? And then we do, within the Franchise 500 issue, we don't list the companies 1 to 500. We list them by their categories. So you will see, who is top in the sandwiches category, who's number one in Mexican food, who's number one in restoration, and then, who's number two and three and four, and so on. We also honor all of the companies that come in at number one in our categories and what we call our best of the best list. Which we publish every year as well. So, yeah, we definitely try to break down lists in different ways, and we will do online lists as well of what are the top restoration franchises, what are the top, you know, cleaning franchises, what are the top food franchises. So, yeah, we try to, use our data that we collect for this Franchise 500 because it does take us a lot of work to use it in multiple different ways.
That makes sense. And like you mentioned, also you have other lists throughout the year that based on different categories and that sort of thing. No, I think that makes a ton of sense. So I guess a good question also would be for somebody that is thinking about buying a franchise. Obviously, there's so many resources out there. There's lots of information. There's lots of maybe misinformation. There's things they want the good, the bad, and the ugly about franchising, and they want the good, the bad, and the ugly about specific brands. Because my perspective is when I work with people that are thinking about buying a franchise, it's yeah, franchising can be great. There's a lot of potential rewards and benefits, and you could build some serious wealth if you do it the right way. But with any business and any opportunity, you're also to some extent buying into a set of challenges, and you need to know going in what those challenges are, and then also know thyself, know if you're equipped with the right skills, right capital, right relationships and frankly the willingness to deal with that certain specific type of challenge. And so I think the more information you can get through the due diligence process, the better. And I think that resources like the Entrepreneur 500 could be very, very helpful. But I'm curious, as an insider, what is your perspective on a way that people that are, and I'm sure a lot of people that are maybe top of the funnel, like they're just starting their look, or maybe even people that are deep in the process. But what would you recommend as an insider in terms of one of the best ways to use the Entrepreneur 500 list to evaluate which opportunities that they'd like to investigate further, and then maybe which ones that they want to stay away from?
Well, like I said, we try to do our best to make sure that all of the information that we are publishing is completely accurate. So the Franchise 500 as a tool, if you're looking to buy a franchise, I think that's, kind of what it is it's a great source of information to just kind of have a snapshot to compare, especially if you know like what industry you're interested in. You can see again, who all is in that industry, how many units do they have, what does their growth look like, what are their costs like, how do they all compare to each other. We always emphasize, like you said, due diligence, due diligence, due diligence. Do not buy a franchise just based on the Franchise 500 ranking. Taco Bell is a great franchise, but it is not going to be the best franchise for every person or even the majority of people. Like you said, you have to know what your strengths are. You have to know what you're interested in and what your budget is and what your, skills are to find the right franchise for you. And I think the Franchise 500, where you have, over 1,300 franchises laid out for you, can be a great starting point for that, to just see what is available out there and then go from there doing your own research. Because also, the Franchise 500 is based all on objective data and on our, metrics of what we think makes a good franchise and a strong franchise. What makes a good franchise for you and your particular lifestyle and situation and skill set is not necessarily going to match up with us. And there's a lot of subjective factors that you need to take into account that our formula is not going to take into account. So we're very proud of our ranking, but do not use it to just buy a franchise based on the Franchise 500 ranking. And don't assume also that, because a franchise ranks higher than another one, that it's necessarily, that lower one is a bad franchise, or that a franchise that doesn't make it into the ranking is a bad franchise. In my opinion, I think 35% of all of the companies that applied this year made it into the ranking. I think a lot of those other 65% are very good brands. And, I would probably consider buying one if I had the capital and the skill set to do so. So don't discount a franchise because it's not ranked in the Franchise 500. But the Franchise 500, can be a great tool to see what companies are really having a strong performance, and our other rankings can be a great tool for that as well. So again, if you're kind of adventurous and okay with getting in with a new and emerging brand, check out our new and emerging franchises list. It's going to have a lot of companies on it that didn't rank on the Franchise 500, but they're good up and coming brands.
I think that's fantastic, and that actually makes me want to dovetail a little bit into another subject, which is like the turnover of the list. So, because we've heard Taco Bell 4 years in a row has been number one, which is fantastic. But how common is it for brands to stay at those rankings? Like, and is it? Do you find that most brands tend to move up in the ranking? Do they stay kind of stagnant and static and around the same spot? Do brands fall off a lot? I mean, I'm sure it varies from year to year, but I mean, like, what percentage of that list was there the prior year, and what percentage are completely new, if you have any data?
It's a great question. I don't have data on that, in front of me. It's not something that I came prepared with, unfortunately. We do see a lot of the same brands make it year after year. We actually started last year what we call our Hall of Fame franchises, and that is honoring franchises that have ranked in the Franchise 500 for 25 years or more, and consecutively. And I believe there are about 50 of those this year. So there are some brands that are with us, year after year after year, and they have a consistent performance. Maybe they move up or down a little bit, but we see brands rising up, we see other brands falling down, and that kind of, is something that we try to get across to franchisors too, is you're not being ranked in a vacuum. So you can have the same performance one year to the next, but if, 20 other companies had a better performance, they might move up on the list and you're getting bumped down, so to speak. And that's why your ranking is lower this year. The participants change from year to year. There are more participants. We're getting bigger brands, as I said, to participate. So it is becoming very competitive.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Like, I think with any, type of, trade publication or ranking system, it's sometimes too, it's getting in there and getting into the system. Like, it's just, playing devil's advocate. Like, I think about myself. I just spoke at an event, and now I'll probably speak at that event every year, right? Because you're in their kind of their system. And as I mentioned, sometimes it's just like, you took the time to do the application, and after you saw the results, you'd keep doing that because it helps a ton. Sometimes you don't realize how like helpful that is. Like, if I think about Taco Bell, maybe at the stage they're at, they're not thinking about selling franchises as much because they've got so many, but they're thinking about how do we attract great executives, right? And hey, here's a ranking that shows we're the top franchise in this ranking. Rankings have so many different purposes depending on, the stage of the career. Like, I'll give you an example. I do this podcast. Why do I do this podcast? It doesn't have to do with rankings, but the more I do podcasts and put out content, the more I find that I hire employees very easily. They saw my content, they like our culture, they join, right? There's so many reasons you do a ranking, and it's not just franchise development. There's so many other factors to it. And I think it's great too if you don't score in certain areas. You can see that, and I know for us, I know it's a different ranking, but we use like our FBR scores as substantial, hiring tools and compensation model tools and everything else. So if I'm a franchisor listening and I want to attempt to get on the ranking in the future, Tracy, where would I go if I'm a listener listening right now?
Excellent question. So, if you're not already on our mailing list, if you're not already in our database, if you've never participated in the Franchise 500 before, or if you're not sure if you have, we have a form on our website. If you go to entrepreneur.com, and I think if you just use our search bar and type in like submit a new franchise or submit a franchise listing or something like that, there's a short little form that you can fill out. It's just, basically what is your franchise, your contact information, that sort of thing. And that allows us to get you added to our database so you're on our mailing list and let you know that, here's how you get your online listing, and then we'll reach out to you when it's time to apply for the Franchise 500. So that's the easiest way. You can also reach out to us at franchise500@entrepreneur.com and, say, hey, we want to be on the Franchise 500. How do we do it? Are we already on your mailing list? What's up? We're happy to help you out there.
I love it. I was going to ask, what's the pitch, quote unquote, for merging franchisors and for new people to get on the list. And I think Dan already kind of did that himself as a newer franchisor. And so I think, yeah, look, if you're there's nothing wrong with. I think it's better to get your foot in the door early and to start acting like a bigger franchisor earlier on, and then you grow in and you step into that role. And I think the feedback is helpful too. I mean, so Tracy, before we wrap up here, is there for those that don't make the ranking or don't make the list, is there any kind of feedback? Do they understand exactly where they fell short or what markers that they could have improved upon to have made the ranking? Or is there any kind of feedback?
We don't reach out to everyone and tell them, here's why you didn't rank or anything like that. It would be difficult to do. We did create a program this year called Entrepreneur Verified. And that is basically just recognizing those franchisors that applied for our ranking, got through the vetting process. Because actually we had probably maybe 30 or 40 franchises that, filled out the form, but maybe, didn't give us correct information and we could never get it vetted, or they didn't give us a current FDD or anything like that. So by us saying you're entrepreneur verified, you didn't rank in the Franchise 500, but we have verified your information that you're a legitimate franchise opportunity. You had a current FDD. The information that we have listed on our site is correct as far as we are able to, tell. And so, we just wanted to give those franchises a little something where they can say, hey, we passed entrepreneurs vetting process, basically. But as far as letting them know why they did not rank, if they reach out to us and ask for an explanation, we do try to look at their data and let them know, okay, well, you scored well in this area, but you didn't score well in this area, or here's where you might have fallen short. I hate to tell you that because it does take a lot of my time answering those emails, but we understand, people take this list seriously, which we appreciate because we take it seriously, and they want to understand why they didn't rank as well as they think they should, or why they didn't rank at all. And so, yes, definitely they can email us at franchise500@entrepreneur.com and ask us for an explanation of why they did not rank as well as they could, or as well as they thought they would. And we will do our best to provide them an explanation, hopefully satisfactory one.
Yeah, and I don't want to create more work for you, but it is nice to know that they can do that. And one thing I'll say, just as an advocate for the franchise industry, and I think that if you're in franchising, you really should be an advocate, not just for your brand or your franchisees or your specific category within franchising, but I think franchising as a whole, you need to be a champion for, because I think it is one of the most under-discussed, undervalued, not quite as much known about or properly understood wealth creation vehicles that is out there in the marketplace. And I think that for those of you that are listening that may be are newer franchisors or franchisees, step into the entrepreneur ecosystem, because Entrepreneur Magazine truly lives that out in terms of being true supporters of the franchise industry in a pretty big way. And like you mentioned, Tracy, maybe they don't get on the Entrepreneur 500 list now, but down the road things change. But you also have those other lists throughout the year that are very important lists to be on for, home-based businesses or maybe home services or emerging brands, like you mentioned. So I think just stepping into that ecosystem, playing ball and supporting a company that is just a huge advocate of franchising is awesome, because at the end of the day, we all believe in franchising and we all need to make franchising better together. And so supporting the companies that are investing into that, I think, is really critical. And so thanks for all you do. And we're super, super awesome and happy that the Entrepreneur 500 exists.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and we think of the Franchise 500 as a celebration of the industry, as a whole, not just the companies that ranked, but all of the opportunities that are out there that are, helping people to, take their work into their own hands and make a way for themselves through franchising. So yeah, our Franchise 500 issue always has a lot of great stories about franchising, and there are, again, so many opportunities out there, and we want to shine a light on all of them.
Awesome. Dan, anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, thanks again, Tracy, for joining. And thanks for our listeners for listening to another episode of the I Fired My Boss podcast. We'll see you on the next one.
You're f***ing fired. If you want to say those words to your boss, make sure you head on over to ifiredmybosspodcast.com and fill out the form to schedule a no-cost consultation. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share with a friend who might also want to fire their boss.